So picture this, the Korthani Empire. These guys have been running the show for 12,000 years. 12,000. That's longer than all of human civilization. While we were still figuring out how to make fire, these crystal beings were already building massive space empires. Their bodies were made of crystal, and they were obsessed with perfect shapes. Like, seriously obsessed. It wasn't just a preference. It was their entire way of life. Every single Korthani was born with geometric patterns carved right into their crystal skin. These patterns decided everything about their life from the moment they came into existence. If you were born with a hexagon pattern, congratulations, you got to be a ruler. Perfect six-sided shapes meant you were destined for the top. Triangle patterns? You became a warrior. Your whole life was about fighting and protecting the empire. But if you got stuck with a circle? Sorry, buddy. You're doing manual labor for the rest of your very long crystal life. And here's the thing. There was no changing it. No working your way up. No proving yourself. The shape you were born with was a shape that defined your entire existence. A circle-marked Korthani could never become a triangle warrior, no matter how brave or strong they were. A triangle could never join the ruling hexagons, no matter how smart or wise they became. They'd conquered 47 different alien species across 200 worlds. That's 200 entire planets, each with their own cultures, their own ways of life, their own dreams and hopes. But the Korthani didn't destroy them or enslave them, not because they were particularly mean or anything. They just couldn't handle chaos. See, the Korthani had this thing about order. Everything had to be perfect, organized, mathematical. When they conquered a world, they didn't come in with massive armies or terrible weapons. Instead, they showed up with clipboards and calculators. They'd study the local species, figure out the most efficient way to organize them, then slot everyone into neat little categories. Their spaceships flew in perfect formations. Never a ship out of place, never a deviation from the pattern. If you looked at a Korthani fleet from above, it would look like someone had drawn geometric shapes in space with ships instead of pencils. Beautiful, precise, and completely predictable. Their cities were built in precise spirals, each building exactly where the mathematical formula said it should be. Streets formed perfect curves. Buildings rose to calculated heights. And every citizen knew exactly where they belonged in the grand design. There were no random neighborhoods, no quirky little shops popping up in unexpected places, no organic growth or change. Their laws never, ever changed. What was written 12,000 years ago was exactly the same as what existed today. Murder was defined the same way. Theft had the same punishment. Even minor infractions, like walking on the wrong side of a pathway, carried the same penalties they always had. This wasn't just tradition. It was their entire philosophy. Change was chaos. Chaos was evil. Order was perfection. And perfection was the only acceptable way to exist. For 12,000 years, the system worked perfectly. Every species they encountered eventually submitted to their organized way of life. Some fought at first, but they always gave up when they realized the Korthani weren't going away. They'd integrate into the Crystal Empire, accept their assigned roles, and become part of the perfect machine. The Korthani had it all figured out. They had mathematical models that could predict exactly how any species would react to conquest. They had psychological profiles for every type of alien mind they might encounter. They had contingency plans for every possible scenario. Then they picked up some radio signals from this tiny blue planet in an unremarkable solar system, Earth. Their long-range sensors showed it was inhabited by a species that seemed pretty typical. They used basic technology, lived in chaotic settlements, and spent most of their time fighting each other over resources and territory. The Korthani scientists ran their standard analysis and concluded it would be another routine addition to the Empire. They figured it would be just another easy conquest, another primitive species to fold into their perfect little empire. The mathematical models showed these humans would probably resist for a few months, maybe a year at most, before accepting their place in the ordered universe. The Korthani prepared their standard conquest fleet, printed out their standard surrender documents, and began planning where to build their first perfectly spiral city on this new world. Boy, were they wrong. When the Korthani sent their fancy diplomatic fleet to Earth, They expected the usual routine. They'd done this exact same thing 47 times before, and it always went the same way. Show up with an impressive fleet, arrange a formal meeting with the local leaders, present the surrender terms in a calm and logical manner, then wait for the inevitable acceptance. Boom! Another world added to the collection. They spent weeks preparing for this meeting. Every detail was planned down to the smallest measurement. The meeting room was arranged with mathematical precision. Chairs positioned at exact angles, lighting calculated for optimal psychological impact. Even the temperature was set to a degree that their studies showed would make primitive species feel slightly uncomfortable and more likely to submit. High Geometrist Vex had practiced his speech hundreds of times. Every word was chosen for maximum efficiency. Every pause was timed to create the perfect dramatic effect. He had charts showing Earth's military capabilities compared to the Corthani Empire. He had graphs demonstrating the benefits of joining their organized civilization. He even had a little presentation about how humans would be sorted into their appropriate geometric categories. The Corthani delegation arrived in their finest crystal armor, each piece polished to reflect light in precise patterns. They moved in perfect formation, their footsteps synchronized, their breathing regulated to create harmonious tones. Everything about them screamed superior civilization, and resistance is futile. But instead of meeting Earth's top political leaders in expensive suits and formal protocol, they met Captain Kate Wilson. Kate showed up wearing what looked like she'd raided a military surplus store during a tornado. Her jacket was olive green, her pants were desert camouflage, and her boots were so old they were held together with duct tape and what appeared to be determination. Her gear was a patchwork of different military branches, some Navy, some Army, some Air Force, and some pieces that looked like they came from countries the Corthani had never even heard of. She walked into their perfectly arranged meeting room and immediately disrupted everything. Instead of sitting in the designated chair at the precise angle they calculated, she grabbed a different chair, spun it around backwards, and sat down with her arms crossed over the back like she was at a backyard barbecue. Then, and this is where the Corthani really started to panic, she propped her beat-up boots right up on their sacred negotiation table. The same table they positioned with mathematical precision. The table that cost more than most planets' annual budgets. While High Geometrist Vex began his carefully rehearsed speech about the glorious benefits of joining the Corthani Empire, Kate wasn't even looking at him. She was turned sideways in her chair, casually braiding the hair of her communications officer. This communications officer, let's call her Beth, was something else entirely. While Kate braided her hair with one hand and ate what appeared to be a peanut butter sandwich with the other, Beth was doing three impossible things at once. She was translating Vex's formal Corthani speech into English for Kate. She was simultaneously translating Kate's responses into Mandarin for the Chinese representative who was participating via video call. And somehow, with her remaining hand, she was casually solving a Rubik's Cube. Not slowly, mind you. She was absolutely destroying that cube while carrying on multiple conversations in different languages. The clicking sound of the cube turning became a weird background rhythm to the whole meeting. The Corthani delegation kept glancing at each other with their crystal faces flickering in patterns that roughly translated to what in the geometric hell is happening here. Vex pushed through his speech, even though everything was going wrong. He talked about efficient resource distribution, logical social hierarchies, and the mathematical beauty of ordered civilization. He presented his charts and graphs with the same precision he'd used 47 times before. Kate nodded occasionally, making little hum sounds like she was listening to a weather report. At one point, she actually yawned. A real, honest-to-goodness yawn right in the middle of Vex's most dramatic moment about the futility of resistance. When Vex finally finished his perfect speech, the same speech that convinced 47 different species to surrender, Kate looked up from Beth's now perfectly braided hair, smiled this crooked little smile, and said, "That's cute. But here's the thing about us humans. We don't really do standard anything." The silence that followed was deafening. The Corthani delegation's crystal faces went through about 12 different color patterns that their translators couldn't even interpret. Vex's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. Standard? Kate continued, now reaching into her pocket to pull out what looked like beef jerky. See, you guys seem to have this whole one-size-fits-all approach to conquering planets. Very organized, very efficient. But we humans, we're kind of allergic to efficiency. Makes us break out in revolution. Beth finished the Rubik's Cube with a satisfying click and started scrambling it again, never once stopping her translations. The Corthani had no idea what to do with that. The first battle was supposed to be simple. Admiral Rex had run this exact scenario in computer simulations over 3,000 times. Every single simulation ended the same way. Total Corthani victory in under 2 hours with minimal damage to their own forces. Rex spent weeks arranging his ships in what the Corthani called the perfect dodecahedron of inevitable victory. It was a beautiful formation that had never failed in 12,000 years of conquest. 12 heavy cruisers formed the outer vertices, with medium destroyers filling the edges, and fighters positioned at mathematically calculated points throughout the interior. Every ship knew exactly where it was supposed to be down to the centimeter. Every weapon had predetermined firing solutions. Every pilot had rehearsed their movements until they could fly the pattern in their sleep. The overlapping fields of fire created an impenetrable web of destruction that could eliminate any enemy force, no matter how they approached. According to Corthani military doctrine, there were exactly 47 possible ways an enemy could attack this formation. They had counter-strategies for all 47 approaches, plus backup plans for the backup plans. Their tactical computers could predict enemy movements up to 15 minutes in advance based on logical military thinking. Rex stood on his bridge, crystal face glowing with confident patterns, watching his perfect formation hold position near Earth's moon. The plan was simple: demonstrate overwhelming superiority, wait for the humans to realize resistance was pointless, then accept their surrender. Clean, efficient, mathematical. Then Earth's defense fleet showed up. Rex's first thought was that someone was playing a practical joke. What emerged from behind Earth's moon looked like the aftermath of a cosmic garage sale. The human fleet was a bizarre collection of ships that seemed to follow no design philosophy whatsoever. There was an old cargo hauler with missile pods welded to its sides, a luxury cruise ship that someone had painted military gray and stuck laser cannons on like afterthoughts. What appeared to be a mining vessel covered in so much additional armor that it looked like a flying brick. There were sleek military fighters mixed in with converted civilian shuttles, some ships that looked like they'd been built in someone's backyard, and at least 3 vessels that the Corthani computers couldn't even identify. The worst part? They were all different sizes, different shapes, different colors. Some were pristine and new. Others looked like they'd been through a blender. Rex counted at least 15 different engine types, 12 different weapon systems, and what appeared to be duct tape holding several ships together. But Rex wasn't worried. Chaos was just another word for target practice in Corthani military thinking. His computers began calculating attack patterns, predicting where this disorganized mob would position themselves for their inevitable defeat. Then the humans attacked, and every single calculation went out the window. They didn't follow any of the 47 predicted attack patterns. They didn't form up in any recognizable formation. Instead, they scattered like a flock of startled birds, each ship moving independently in directions that made no tactical sense whatsoever. Some ships dove straight down below the Corthani formation. Others spiraled up and around in loops that served no strategic purpose. A few just sat there spinning in place while shooting at random targets. One ship was flying backwards while firing forward, which should have been impossible according to basic physics. The Corthani computers were having nervous breakdowns trying to predict what would happen next. Every time they calculated where a human ship should go, it went somewhere completely different. The targeting systems kept locking onto ships that suddenly weren't there anymore, having wandered off to do something unexpected. Rex watched in growing horror as his perfect formation started to fall apart. His ships were designed to work as a coordinated unit, but the humans weren't giving them anything to coordinate against. It was like trying to fight a swarm of angry bees using a chess strategy. Then came the moment that broke Rex's brain entirely. A tiny human ship. Looked like someone had strapped engines to a shipping container, somehow slipped through the gaps in his formation, and ended up right in the middle of the perfect dodecahedron of inevitable victory. This should have been impossible. The computer models showed there was no way through the overlapping fields of fire. But there it was, sitting in the exact center of his formation, like it owned the place. And then it started playing music. Not just any music, loud, chaotic, thumping rock music that the human pilot was broadcasting on all frequencies. The song was something called Born to be Wild, and it was so loud that Rex could hear it through his ship's hull. While this impossible music blared across the battlefield, the little ship spun around like a top and started shooting in every direction at once. Not aiming, not targeting, just spraying weapons fire in all directions while that insane music played. The Kurthani formation, designed for external threats, had no idea how to deal with an enemy that was somehow inside their perfect geometry, spinning around like a demented disco ball while playing music that made their crystal forms vibrate in uncomfortable ways. For the first time in millennia, a Kurthani felt confused. Rex stared at his tactical display, crystal face flickering through color patterns that roughly translated to "what the hell is happening," and realized that 12,000 years of military doctrine had not prepared him for humans. News about these weird humans spread through Kurthani space like wildfire. And we're talking about an empire that stretched across 200 worlds. That's a lot of crystal beings suddenly very confused about what they just witnessed. At first, the report seemed impossible. Admiral Rex's official battle report read, like science fiction, even to other Kurthani. Ships that move without patterns, music as a weapon, a formation-breaking maneuver that involved duct tape and pure audacity. The High Command thought Rex had suffered some kind of crystal fracture and was hallucinating. But then more reports started flooding in from across the Empire. And it wasn't just that humans fought strangely. They did everything strangely. Take prisoner escapes, for example. The Kurthani had perfected prisoner management over 12,000 years. They had mathematical formulas for guard rotations, psychological profiles for different species, and security protocols that had never been breached. Their prisons were geometric marvels of efficiency, where escape was literally impossible according to every calculation they'd ever run. Then humans started getting captured. The first escape happened on Prison Station Delta 7, a facility that housed dangerous criminals from 15 different species. A human named Jake somehow convinced a Kurthani guard to help him escape because, and I quote from the official report, he looked sad and said his mom would worry about him. The guard, a triangle-marked warrior who'd never disobeyed an order in 300 years of service, just let him go. When asked why, the guard could only say that the human's eyes leaked water, and it made him feel uncomfortable geometric sensations. But Jake didn't just escape. He came back the next day with homemade cookies for the guards and a guitar. He taught them songs. Prison Station Delta 7, the most secure facility in the sector, turned into what the reports described as an unauthorized music festival with armed supervision. The diplomatic incidents were even worse. Human ambassadors would show up to formal state meetings wearing mismatched clothes that violated every protocol in the Kurthani handbook. Instead of following the traditional greeting ceremonies that took exactly 47 minutes to complete, they'd walk in, shake hands with everyone, and start telling jokes. Actual jokes. In the middle of serious diplomatic negotiations. Ambassador Lucy showed up to negotiate a mining rights treaty wearing sneakers, jeans, and a t-shirt that said, "World's okayest diplomat." She spent the first hour of the meeting teaching the planetary governor's children how to make paper airplanes. By the end of the day, she'd somehow convinced the entire planetary government to switch sides by sharing funny stories about her cat. The governor's official statement was just, "She made us laugh. We have never laughed before. It was pleasant." But here's the really scary part for the Kurthani. The humans were contagious. Whatever this humanity thing was, it spread faster than a computer virus through their perfect society. Kurthani workers, who had followed the same efficiency protocols for millennia, started questioning their productivity ratings. A circle-marked laborer named Hex, 4521, actually asked the supervisor, "Why do we need to move exactly 847 units per day? What if I want to move 850 today and 844 tomorrow?" The supervisor had no answer. The question wasn't in any of their manuals. Warriors began making up new tactics on the spot instead of following their predetermined battle strategies. Triangle-marked soldiers started painting designs on their weapons, giving their ships nicknames, and worst of all, improvising during combat exercises. One warrior actually said, "What if we tried something crazy during a training session?" The phrase, "something crazy," wasn't even in the Korthani language until they met humans. Even the rulers, the perfect hexagon-marked elite who had guided the empire for 12,000 years, started experiencing doubt. High Geometrus Prime, 9901, was overheard asking, "Why are perfect hexagons automatically better than," as a human diplomat put it, "wonky pentagons with personality?" That question kept echoing through Korthani space. What made perfection perfect? These crystal beings were experiencing emotions they didn't have words for. They felt something when they saw humans laugh, a warmth that had nothing to do with thermal regulation. They experienced sensations when humans told stories, anticipation, surprise, joy. These were concepts that didn't exist in Korthani mathematics. They were making choices that served no logical purpose. A Korthani engineer spent 3 days building a sculpture instead of working on his assigned project, just because a human prisoner told him it might be fun. A military commander rearranged his ship formations because they looked more interesting in a spiral pattern instead of the regulation dodecahedron. A circle-marked worker actually requested a different job assignment, not for efficiency reasons, not for logical advancement, but because she wanted to try something new. The request forms didn't even have a box for something new. The bureaucrats had to invent new paperwork. And the worst part? They were enjoying it. These beings who had lived for centuries in perfect order, following perfect rules, executing perfect plans, were discovering the chaos of choice. And instead of the horror they expected to feel, instead of the geometric wrongness their society had taught them to fear, they felt alive. The Korthani Empire, built on 12,000 years of unchanging perfection, was experiencing its first case of spontaneous happiness, and it was spreading faster than they could contain it. The day the Korthani Empire officially dissolved itself was nothing like anyone expected. There were no dramatic ceremonies, no formal declarations, no grand speeches from crystal balconies. It just happened, like everything else humans had taught them. It was wonderfully chaotic and completely unpredictable. High Geometrus Vex found himself standing in what used to be the Chamber of Eternal Order, the most sacred space in the entire empire. For 12,000 years, this room had been the beating heart of Korthani civilization. Every law, every regulation, every perfectly calculated decision had been made within these mathematically precise walls. The chamber used to be a monument to geometric perfection. Crystal pillars rose at exact angles, creating shadows that fell in predetermined patterns. The floor was an intricate mosaic of perfect shapes, each tile placed according to ancient formulas. The ceiling formed a flawless dome that represented the mathematical harmony of the universe. Now it looked like the world's most beautiful organized chaos. The room was full of Korthani and humans working together on projects that had no predetermined outcomes, no calculated results, no guaranteed efficiency ratings. In one corner, a group was building something that looked like a cross between a sculpture and a playground. Nobody could explain what it was for, but everyone agreed it looked cool. Along the far wall, mixed teams of humans and Korthani were collaborating on what they called experimental art. Crystal beings who had never created anything that wasn't functionally perfect were now making sculptures that were deliberately wonky, paintings that used colors in ways that served no logical purpose, and music that followed no mathematical patterns. A human engineer named Tony was teaching Korthani architects how to design buildings that were interesting instead of efficient. They were sketching structures with curved walls, asymmetrical windows, and decorative elements that served absolutely no functional purpose. The Korthani architects kept asking, but why? And Tony kept answering, because it looks neat, which somehow became a perfectly acceptable architectural principle. Near the center of the room, former warriors were learning something humans called cooperative gaming. Instead of strategic combat simulations, they were playing games where winning wasn't the point. The point was just to have fun together. The concept of fun for its own sake had broken several Korthani minds when it was first introduced. But the most amazing sight was happening right in front of Vex. A human kid, couldn't have been more than 10 years old, was teaching a group of young Korthani how to play a game where they made up the rules as they went along. Okay, So now we pretend the floor is lava. The kid was saying, but only the red tiles. The blue tiles are safe, but they make you hop on one foot. And if you touch a yellow tile, you have to sing a song about your favorite food. The young Corthani were completely fascinated. Their crystal faces flickered with patterns of confusion and delight as they tried to follow rules that changed every few minutes. One young Corthani asked, but what is the objective? How do we achieve victory? The human kid just grinned and said, there is no victory. We just play until we get tired or hungry or want to do something else. The concept of an activity with no victory condition, no measurable outcome, no efficiency rating, was revolutionary. These young Corthani were learning to do things just because they felt like it. And Vex? He was actually humming a song Kate had taught him during one of their many conversations. It was some old human tune called Here Comes the Sun, and he found himself humming it whenever he felt particularly content. The idea that music could exist purely for the feeling it created, rather than for ceremonial or communication purposes, was still new to him. His own crystal body had changed dramatically over the past months. He developed what humans call character, little imperfections, tiny cracks, and irregular patterns that made him unique instead of identical to every other high geometrist. At first, he'd been horrified by these flaws. According to everything he'd been taught, imperfection was weakness, but humans saw it differently. They told him the little irregularities made him himself. They said the cracks caught light in interesting ways, that the asymmetrical patterns were distinguished. One human had even said his flawed crystal face was handsome, a concept that had no equivalent in Corthani language. When Kate walked over with that impossible smile of hers, the same smile that started this whole beautiful disaster, Vex felt something he'd never experienced before. Not just contentment or satisfaction, but actual happiness. Pure, illogical, wonderful happiness. She looked different too. Her mismatched military gear had been replaced by casual clothes that somehow looked both comfortable and professional. Her hair was a little longer, and she'd started wearing jewelry made by Corthani artists, pieces that combined crystal precision with human creativity. How did you know we could change? Vex asked a question that had been growing in his mind, like a beautiful crack in his perfect thoughts. How did you know that beings who had lived the same way for 12,000 years could become something different? Kate looked around at the beautiful chaos surrounding them. Former enemies working together, rigid hierarchies replaced by fluid cooperation, mathematical perfection, giving way to creative expression. She shrugged in that perfectly human way that had become universal throughout former Corthani space. We didn't, she said simply, but we figured it was worth finding out. That's kind of our thing. We try stuff and see what happens. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but you never know until you try. She paused, watching the human child teach the Corthani youth a new variation of their impossible game. Turns out, everything can change. You just have to be brave enough to let it.